Click start meeting button above. Okay, I better have access to this meeting recording. Okay, so good morning, Zoom. And today we're going to take 2 of Schopenhauer, because last night I forgot to press record. So I read all my notes back. It took over half an hour. So I'm just reading the introduction notes instead, which is by Christopher Yarnaway or Janaway. I'm not finished the introduction yet, so I better start reading. No, Schopenhauer's question was, what is the world? What is world for Schopenhauer? World is the nature of our cognition or our knowledge of reality, and how this knowledge of reality relates to reality itself. His question about world includes the nature of our existence and the existence of everything in the world. Also included asks what is and is not of value in existence. He offers an account that claims the human condition consists in pain and the possibility of deliverance from said pain. How does Schopenhauer answer his questions, which are as follows? Can I get that looking a bit nicer? I don't think so. How come? I need to have it in reading view. I'll do that. How does Schopenhauer answer his questions, which are as follows? 1. What is the nature of our cognition, as how we acquire knowledge and understanding? This is an ontological question. Why are knowledge and understanding always together, as if they are synonyms? Understanding is having a grasp of a topic. Knowledge consists in topics. Knowledge is topics, and understanding is affirming those topics to be knowable, and that one has a grasp of what the knowledge in those topics is. Sense data is how we grasp reality. 2, what is the nature of our knowledge of reality? This is an ontological question. It's central and situated, perspectival, intertwined entanglement of subject and object, incomplete grasp of being. How this knowledge of reality relates to reality itself, insofar as is our knowledge adequate enough to know reality? 1. Why is it that there's a reality itself that's distinct from our knowledge of reality? How do we know there's more to reality than what we can feel, sense? 2, not an ethical question, but it's a relation that's not between subject and object, because it's a relation. One is an object, not a subject. The bot says it is an ontological question about the nature of knowledge, knowledge being our knowledge vis-a-vis the world. Step 1, what are our mechanics to get to knowledge? Step 2, does this enable us to grasp reality? Step 3, he retreats to ask of us, what is our nature? Step 4, asks of the nature of all that exists, same as ours. Step 5, then infers value of existence as objects. Concludes humans' essential pain and proposes deliverance from that pain. 4, the nature of our existence. If the world is will, then we are will, so why this pessimism towards our existence? Our existence is our volition, our desires. 5, the nature of the existence of everything in the world. Is there desires as will? Infinity equals nothing, always something. What is and is not of value in existence? Value is posited by resentiment. Thinking being needs hierarchy, something less or more to value. Why would there be value in being? He claims the human condition is of pain and proposes the possibility of deliverance from said pain. What is it? Why is it pain for him? Quote, but we can perhaps make an initial approach towards what Schopenhauer means by his book being thoughts about a single topic. Isn't his question, what is the world? If we examine the framework of 4 books into which the world as will and representation is divided, their titles and discursive subtitles are as follows. 1, the world as representation, first consideration. Representation subject to the principle of sufficient reason, the object of experience and science. 2, the world as will, first consideration, the objectivation of the will. 3, the world as representation, second consideration, representation independent of the principle of sufficient reason, the Platonic idea, the object of art. 4, the world as will, second consideration, with the achievement of self-knowledge, affirmation and negation of the will to life. One and the same world has 2 aspects, and we can learn about it by considering it as 1 representation, then 2 as will, then 1 asterisk as representation in altered fashion, then 2 asterisks as will in altered fashion. It's a bit repetitive, this bit, but where's that down here? It's good to repeat because then you just remember. That's H1 is heading 1. The principle of sufficient reason. Nothing is without a ground for its being rather than not being. Nothing happens without a reason. Why is it so and not the otherwise? Why it is so and not otherwise? If everything that exists, for everything that exists or every event that occurs, there must be an explanation or sufficient reason for it. With the world as representation, we either consider it with the principle of sufficient reason, that there must be a cause or a reason for the world, or we consider it independently of a sufficient reason. How do we consider it independently of the principle of sufficient reason? There is no reason for the world. With the world as will, we can either consider it descriptively for what it is, or we can consider it on an evaluative dimension with respect to the world as wills, affirmation or negation. Representation, German Vorstellung, to consider the world as it presents itself to us in our minds is the only option. We can't consider the world as not presented to us. That is the only way we can have a perspective of it. Orange is me, but some of me in there as well. The world beyond representation, as how it presents itself to us, is the world as thing in itself, which I think is meant to be world in itself. For Schopenhauer, the will is the world in itself. Why did Schopenhauer make the world have a wish or a volition or desire, a will? Is it because the world is an expression? To express something, you have to have an intent. Who expressed the world? The divine creator? For Schopenhauer, one single essence that underlies all objects and all phenomena, ourselves included, one single way in which the riddle of all existence can be deciphered, as will. Is he a Spinozist, a monist? Objectivation of the will is the multiplicity of individual objects that embody the will, which is a striving toward existence and life. Even though human beings share their ultimate nature with every other being in the world, the distinction is human rationality and consciousness, and this distinction is what is called on for human exceptionalism. A tautological argument, isn't it? Yes. No, it's begging the question. Oh, that's fine. Objectivation is will's expression of objects. 1, with the world as representation, we can either consider it subject to the principle of sufficient reason or independently of that principle. 2, with the world as will, we can either consider it descriptively for what it is, or we can consider it on an evaluative dimension with respect to its affirmation or negation. Representation in German is German Vorstellung, which is, following Kant, anything that the mind is conscious of in its experience, knowledge or cognition of any form, something that is present to the mind. Lacan talks of Vorstellung as well, and they're They're what the signifiers that come up in dreams. Representation, representing the desire. They're representations of representations. Signifies. It signifies. The introduction says, to understand Schopenhauer's single thought, we must start with the objects of world as a presentation of itself, the world. These objects, as the world presents them to us, are ordered via space and time and by relations of cause and effect. All the ways in which the world is thus ordered for us are species of a single principle. Nothing is without a ground for its being rather than not being, otherwise known as the principle of sufficient reason. They say there must be a reason for existence. That's a quote. This is my interpreting. They say there must be a reason for existence. Which suggests a will or purpose for existing. Silly to insist a reason for something rather than no reason. It would lead to a pessimism, because what if the reason is something not there, like God? If there was a reason and somehow disattached itself from existence, then we create our own way for continuing to be alive. If there is a reason, then does this reason always be there as the ground? What is the reason for existence? Life, if that's existence. What if there's no reason for existence? Then we make our own way instead. Existence needs reason for value. If we don't ground ourselves as if we are in existence, then we don't have the reason to outline our path to stay true to, as if reason is also an end of our existence. If reason is our ground, reason is the same as the end of our existence. Every object is experienced as related to something else which grounds it. Every object's grounds is that it exists. Everything in space and time has a determinate position in relation to other. It's a direct quote. No, it's not. Oh, yes, it is. It should have a quotation mark. Everything in space and time has a determinate position in relation to other things in space and time. Everything that happens has a determinate cause. Every action relates back to a motive and to its agent's character. Every truth is grounded in some other truth or in the experience of the senses. That determinate position is in relation. If something happens implies that there's no will to it, so there's something else with the will that caused the happening. An action suggests an actor, which suggests a will. Every truth is grounded on a premise that came before, or on the evidence of the senses, which can be deceived. So we stand on the shoulder of giants as premises and paint our own evidence. And when we check how our renditions as premises play out in the argument spaces of logic, is if we, with imaginations, knew the extent of this space of logic. Sounds good enough for me. Good enough builds bridges, aka sufficient reason builds bridges. The world as thing in itself. Notice there's no embellishments between these three words, as you might see in, say, Sartre. Embellishments must have come from people after Schopenhauer, who put his concept of thing in itself as the world as thing in itself, or world in itself, with embellishments. The world as thing in itself is how the world is apart from the way it presents itself to us and we grasp it. What makes us think there is a world that is apart from the way we grasp it? Pure world without our position attached to it? Doesn't quantum physics say the thing appears only when we try to measure it? Something. For Schopenhauer, world is a striving, it's in motion, it's a drive, a teleology to exist for or for something else. And he says the world is will and representation, which I think should be objectivation. Human individuals are primarily beings who will and act. and share their ultimate nature with every other being in the world. Human rationality and consciousness are extremely useful and give us an instrumental superiority over other beings, but are really only a froth on the surface and do not distinguish humanity from the rest of nature at the most fundamental level. Rationality as reason and consciousness of others or ourselves, and these things are our tools that we think give us the right to might and superiority over other beings. This rationality and consciousness serve as the ends of willing. Our ability to perceive and invest in the world functions primarily to enable us to manipulate objects that confront us in order to continue existing and to reproduce ourselves, aka use our own art as in skills to continue existing. So why do we accumulate more than we need, more than what we need? Is it ideology, e.g. capitalism? We must buy more continuously and produce lots of waste. The world as will, as the deeper and darker aspect of reality, because everything that wills, the world included, or strives, is necessarily at the mercy of suffering. So the world might not get what it wants, and suffering is the driver of the world. And because this suffering has neither point nor end, what if we do get what we want? We'll want continuously. As long as we will, we suffer. We also enjoy, but that we will, and ultimately what we will, is a function of our inescapable essence, not something rationally chosen and not something we have the means to put an end to by willing. Something is driving the will. What? It's a function of our essence. What is essential to us? Existence. So existence drives the will, but this deeper aspect talks of us rather than the world as will. In the introduction anyway. It can happen, according to Schopenhauer, that we confront objects in a kind of experience that is out of the ordinary. We find all the usual kinds of relation, space, time, and cause and effect suspended and lose ourselves in contemplation, forgetful of ourselves and of the distinction between ourselves and what we perceive. This is aesthetic experience, an extreme form of disinterestedness, a passive mirroring of the world in which we cease to grapple with the world of objects, cease striving, and find temporary release from pain, while becoming as free as we can from subjectivity. We apprehend nature in a manner that takes our cognition as close as possible to the true essence of things. We perceive timeless features that run through nature, which Schopenhauer calls ideas, intending us to take this notion in a sense close to Plato's, or what are often called Platonic forms nowadays. Art provides the best opportunity for this kind of experience because it gives us a view of nature mediated through the exceptionally objective mind of a genius. Art enables us, as spectators, a state of calm passivity and enhanced objectivity, and the various art forms allow us to recognize diverse aspects of the will's manifestation in the world from, as it were, a vantage point where our individual own will is not engaged. This aesthetic experience enables this objectivity because we sit back and notice the forms of the expression as will of the world. I should have put a jumper on. But the world in itself, outside of the forms of space and time that govern the world as representation for us, cannot be separated into individuals. The truly wise human being would comprehend this and would cease to be attached to the strivings of the particular individual manifestation of will he or she is. Such a redemptive state, sometimes reached intuitively through the painful experiences of life itself, is the will's self-negation or self-abolition. The will, that is the human being's essence, recoils from pursuing any of its goals, and the sense of individuality weakens to the point where reality can be contemplated with a serenity that is void of the usual pains of existence, because the subject has become void of all striving and void of the usual sense of self. When we realize that our individuality is an illusion because we are world as will, is the self-negation, self-abolition that frees us from suffering. That's why it's a good thing to be an apprentice agar. It's one. The World of Objects and Schopenhauer's introductory essay. Quote, two relatively simple ideas set the framework on the fourfold route. One is the principle of sufficient reason. The first idea that frames Schopenhauer's doctoral dissertation, the introductory essay on the fourfold route of the principle of sufficient reason, is the principle of sufficient ground. Reason. The second main idea is that all representation consists in the relation of subject and object. Is representation here the first consideration of world as representation, instead of representation being a mention of subject-object? All cognition, the mental activity of acquiring knowledge and understanding, is by a subject and of an object, while the subject has cognition and the subject is presupposed wherever there is cognition. The subject itself is never cognized, known. Is that because we don't have a God's eye view of the subject? Does that imply we do of the object? So we have a complete view of the world as representation. So where is the world in itself? Not representation, but presented. What the subject is conscious of is always some object, but all objects are representations. To be an object for the subject and to be our representation are the same, an object for us. Rather than representing us subjects, an object is to be for the subject, that is, an object. The relation is purposive. An object is a gift for, is given for us subjects. All of our representations are objects for the subject, and all objects for the subject are our representations. Thus, if we investigate the way our representations, aka objects, my emphasis, are organized, we shall at the same time be understanding the basic structure that pertains to objects of any kind. Schopenhauer now points out that our experience of objects is always of them in relation to one another. We never have cognition of anything subsisting for itself and independent, single and detached. And whatever is in our awareness, even if we don't notice this fact, even if it is beyond our awareness, the fact remains that there's a fundamental and necessary relation between objects. And whatever the particular content of our consciousness, there are certain kinds of relation between objects that are fundamental and necessary. All our representations stand to one another in a law-like connection in respect of form, which can be determined a priori, that is, theoretically rather than experientially. Discovering the necessary kinds of connection between representations is discovering the necessary connections of all objects, and all these are connections of ground and consequent, although these connections as grounds are forms of the principle of sufficient reason. All objects have a form that entails their connection, and this form can be determined theoretically. I'm reading quote, Schopenhauer shows how the principle of sufficient reason covers quite different species of ground-consequent relation, and complains with some justification that previous philosophers have tended not to distinguish them clearly. The fourfold root of the principle of sufficient reason. The four roots, I should say. 1, the law of causality, the principle that everything that happens. That's not a quote, I don't think. I think I wrote this. The law of causality, the principle that everything that happens is the effect of some cause. This law governs all happenings in the realm of space and time. For all occurrences, there's a cause. 2, we also use concepts to describe our world and use these to make judgments. These concepts give us reasons to judge, causes to judge, but these judgments need to be grounded if they are to be considered true judgments. Schopenhauer claims this grounding is not causal, but are not the causes the concepts, the reasons? Within this second root of the principle of sufficient reason, Schopenhauer says there's 4 elements that ground judgments, truths. 1, the logical formal truth relies on a previous premise to ground this truth as a deduction. Empirical truth, judgment, relies on sense data as immediate non-conceptual awareness of representation, that is, objects. That would be intuition in Kant, I suppose. Transcendental truth, this truth follows Kant's argument that a thing is true because that thing, that is, that category, is a condition of possibility for our being able to experience anything. In distinction to an analytic a priori, a transcendental truth is a synthetic a priori, which adds information about the subject and cannot be discerned through sense data. The analytic a priori states a theoretical truth, such as a bachelor is unmarried. A synthetic a priori is true because it grounds experience, and you cannot glean this knowledge from experience or concepts, as in sense data. It's done by the transcendental deduction that asks for the condition that make experience possible, and these conditions are categories like causality, time, space, number. The author of the introduction in one sentence says that the transcendental judgment is a claim of Schopenhauer that they have their truth grounded not in experience nor logical deduction, but in the conditions of the possibility of experience, which is Kant's claim. Schopenhauer follows Kant here. Finally, a meta-logical truth, which are the conditions that make thinking possible, which in footnote 4, the 4 metalogical truths are offered, which sound like truths of logic. And I believe this is a continuation. It's 1, 2, 3. Quote, Schopenhauer, I don't know whether it's Schopenhauer follows Kant in suggesting that there is a non-empirical a priori form of cognition. Is it a synthetic a priori that a transcendental deduction performs? Schopenhauer follows Kant in suggesting that there is a non-empirical a priori form of cognition of the necessary properties of space and time to be had in geometry and arithmetic, another category in these knowledge branches. So he finds here a kind of ground-consequent relationship that is not one of causality and not a matter of the relationship between judgments. What relationship between judgments? This might be put by saying that a part of space or time is neither caused nor justified by its relation to other parts of space and time, but rather is constituted by such relations. Okay, 10 minutes. So Schopenhauer talks here of the principle of sufficient ground of being. I don't understand this bit. What do you not understand? This might be put by saying that a part of space and time is neither caused nor justified by its relation in other parts of space, relation to other parts of space and time, but rather is constituted by such relations. What's the difference between caused and constituted? So Schopenhauer talks here of the principle of sufficient reason being of ground. What is the relation of motive to action? Is motive as movement or reason? The chief points he makes on the topic of willing in on the fourfold route are as follows. A, inner self-consciousness, and outer consciousness, cognition, the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding. Inner and outer consciousness. B, for Schopenhauer, within self-consciousness are movements of the will, acting, trying, deciding, desiring, and registering affects and feelings. The bot affect, raw impulses, leads to feeling, emotional tones. Feelings can be named, and desire, motives, inclinations, equals actions, bodily movements, and affects can't be. They're before the naming of feelings. Actions, bodily movements as one continuous chain of willing. Outer consciousness and self-consciousness are quite distinct. The insight that outer consciousness that moves one's will, their inner self-consciousness, to action is a motive and belongs to the law of cause and effects. That is, the law of motivation is a version of the law of causality, which governs the world of objects. This idea that motivation as experience affecting can cause a will to action, he says, is the foundation stone of his whole metaphysics. First book. Where's the timer, mate? Oh, there's 7 minutes. The world as representation, first consideration, accounts for the mechanism or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding, cognition, and how that cognition as mechanism or process relates or connects to reality. The three top themes of the first book. 1, idealism. Transcendental idealism by Kant, the objects that we experience as outside us in space and time causally interact in law-like ways, and these objects constitute a world of appearance because we do not experience these objects in themselves, merely appearances. The familiar world of empirical things is a world of objects for a subject, which is to say a world consisting of the subject's representations. And this world of the subject's objects as representations is not a world that can be regarded as existing in itself. This world doesn't exist in itself, independently of the way it appears and must appear to an experiencing mind. Why must these appearances as objects be limited, demarcated by the subject? Possibly because no one else can. But why are objects merely appearances and not things in themselves? The mind activates these objects as being, that is, the form of the mind itself necessarily limits or shapes the content of this realm of objects. This is because the realm of objects is within the realm of space and time and cause and effect. Space, time, and cause and effect for Kant and Schopenhauer are truths a priori, truths that we can know independently of confirmation through experience. They are ground rules for the possibility of experience itself. The proposition that leads to this transcendental idealism is no object without subject. 2, the relation of subject and object. What is the 2 again? Themes. Subject and object can't exist without each other or don't. Why are objects for a subject? Why can't they just be for no reason? Why does the subject possess the object as if the subject was active and the object for his use? Objects as the subject's representations reminds me of theory latentness. This theory posits the idea that you cannot see unless you've got the theory behind you to notice shades of grey. So the subject is representing objects as in representing them or even possessing them, demarcating them as his will. Is Schopenhauer saying that objects are a priori truths as well? They condition experience as a relation with subjects? because they are necessarily within experience as space and time, cause and effect, they too have this possibility about them too. It's difficult to precisely confirm that mind and object and space and time and cause and effect are all these a priori truths, but I think that when the author of this intro uses the pronoun these, he's pointing to all 6 nouns mentioned earlier. What? Why does that not do it properly? Come on. What? What? Where was I? No, no. This bit. Come here. There is more than a suspicion that Schopenhauer understands by object simply something that presents itself to the mind of a subject, in which case no object without subject is virtually a tautology, but that at the same time he takes the proposition to make a substantive claim by letting object mean something like thing in the world, or at least cognizable thing in the world. And it seems to be the case that it's got some sort of will itself as well, because how can something present itself if it doesn't have a will? What? I don't understand. I don't know what the difference is between an object presented to the mind vis-a-vis cognizable thing in the world. It is 2 things to say. One, that there's being, that anything's being an object of cognition for me depends on my being there as subject of the cognition. A being for my cognition depends on myself as subject to be there too, so that cognition takes place and possession. Vis-a-vis 2, that anything I have cognition of could not exist except as cognized by me, or that anything human beings in general have cognition of could not exist except as cognized, because these latter 2 suggest as we as subjects have a God's eye view insofar as we cognize all and everything in being. Subject does not mean the same for Schopenhauer as person or human individual. These terms refer to items in the world of objects. As embodied, we are objects of the world of objects, but the subject is not an item or object in the world. Why? Because it's a subject, but cannot it be an object for another subject, like women throughout history are theorized? So as person or embodied human individual, each of us is in and of the world of objects, that is, something existing as an object among objects. But in addition, we are the subject in whose consciousness all objects are presented, but which cannot itself be conceived as existing among them. All objects are presents to a subject's consciousness. Are we God? How can we be aware of all objects? But the subject, which, strike through, the subject cannot itself be conceived as existing among them objects. Is this because the subject is merely consciousness and not also a body? If the subject was embodied, as mentioned earlier, is also an object item of the world of objects, so is God. Note, the notion that our existence and sense of self are poised